The final day of their journey through the jungle was unlike anything Velara had ever experienced. Word had spread through Thesa Prime in whatever way apex predators communicate with each other. Perhaps it was through scent markers or sound frequencies that her equipment could not detect. Perhaps it was something else entirely. But whatever the method, the result was unmistakable. The jungle was afraid of them now. More stalkers detected their group during that final day of travel. Velara's sensors picked them up moving through the canopy above, and her warriors prepared for battle each time. But none of the stalkers attacked. Each one would approach to within 100 meters, and then stop. They would watch the group for several minutes, and then they would retreat. They were not hunting. They were observing, and whatever they saw made them decide that this group was not prey. Cole walked at the front of the group. Now no one had asked him to take that position, and no one had ordered him to do. I'd simply moved to the front, and everyone else fell in behind him, even Commander Thexus and his elite warriors walked behind the human without complaint. The jungle that had killed ascended hunting parties parted for them like water around a stone. Dangerous animals fled at their approach, and poisonous plants seemed to curve away from their path. Velara knew it was just coincidence, and her rational mind told her that the jungle was not actually responding to Cole's presence, but her instincts told her something different. Her instincts told her that the jungle recognized a superior predator, and the jungle was getting out of his way. They reached the summit facility in the early afternoon. The building was old and covered in vines, but it was still intact. Velara felt a wave of relief wash over her as they approached the doors. They had survived. Against all expectations, they had crossed the Emerald Hell and reached their destination. She turned to look at Lieutenant Cole and found him watching the jungle one last time. His face was calm and his breathing was steady, and there was no sign of exhaustion or stress in his posture. Had walked 12 kilometers through one of the most dangerous environments in the galaxy, and he looked like he could do it again without rest. Lieutenant Cole Velara said. He turned to face her. Your Highness, I called you a novice when we first met. I did. Cole agreed. I was wrong. She hesitated for a moment and then extended her hand in the human fashion. What training program produces men like you? Lieutenant Cole looked at her hand and then reached out to shake it. His grip was firm but not aggressive, and his palm was warm and dry. We call it growing up on Earth. Your Highness, he said, and for the first time she saw him smile with genuine warmth. Every human goes through it. Some of us just remember it better than others. Velara held his hand for a moment, longer than necessary. You were saying that you are not exceptional. Cole shook his head. I am average. Your Highness may be a little above average in some areas, but there are billions of humans, and most of them could have done what I did today. Some of them could have done it better. Velara released his hand and felt something shift in her understanding of the galaxy. The Kirellan Empire had ruled 1,000 systems for 20,000 years. They had encountered hundreds of intelligent species, and they had conquered or allied with all of them. They had always assumed that their power came from their technology and their military strength, but now Velara understood something new. Power did not come from weapons or ships or armies. Power came from the thing that lived inside a species, thing that drove them forward, no matter what obstacles they faced. The Kirellans had become comfortable in their power. They had forgotten what it meant to struggle and fight and survive. But the humans had never forgotten. Every single one of them carried the memory of millions of years of hunting in their blood. Every single one of them was an apex predator in waiting, and there were billions of them. The treaty negotiations went smoothly after that. The Kirellan diplomats who had expected to dictate terms to the primitive humans found themselves dealing with equals. The condescension that had marked their earlier communications disappeared completely, and when the treaty was signed, it was a partnership of equals. Rather than a dominant power granting favors to a lesser species, Velara watched the human delegation board their shuttle at the end of the summit, and she felt a strange mixture of emotions. There Was respect and admiration for what she had witnessed there. Was gratitude for Cole's protection during their journey. But underneath all of that, there was something else, something that felt very much like fear in the centuries that followed the story of Thesa. Prime spread across the galactic network. Species who had dismissed humanity as newcomers began to study Earth's history more carefully. What they found gave them nightmares. They found a species that had hunted megafauna to extinction using nothing but pointed sticks and patience. They found a species that had survived ice ages and supervolcanoes and mass extinction events. They found a species that had turned every environment on their world into their hunting ground, deserts and tundra and jungles and oceans. The humans had conquered them all, and they had done it without claws or fangs or armor or venom. They had done it by being patient, by being persistent, by refusing to give up no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The Kirellans had looked at humanity and seen a young species just beginning to explore the stars. They had been wrong. Humanity was not young. Humanity was ancient, in ways that mattered far more than the age of their technology. They were the children of Earth, and Earth had forged them in fire and ice and blood. Every human alive was the descendant of survivors who had faced impossible odds and won, and that heritage lived in their bones, still waiting to be called upon. The galactic community learned to treat humanity with respect after Thesa Prime, not because humans had powerful weapons or advanced technology, but because every species in the galaxy eventually learned the truth that the stalkers of Thesa Prime had learned. When you looked into a human's eyes, you were looking at millions of years of successful predation. You were looking at the face of something that had never stopped hunting, something that would follow you to the ends of the universe if it decided you were prey, something that would never ever give up. The princes had called him just a novice. The apex predators had stepped back in fear, and the galaxy learned that humans were not the newcomers they appeared to be. They were something far older and far more dangerous. They were the most successful hunters the universe had ever produced, and they were just getting started. That night, they sheltered in another cave that Cole had found, and the atmosphere among the group was tense and strange. The Kirellan warriors sat together on one side of the cave and spoke in low voices that were too quiet for anyone else to hear. Ambassador Chun seemed unconcerned by the events of the day, and he ate his rations with the same calm demeanor he always showed. The princess Velara could not stop thinking about what she had witnessed. She could not stop seeing that smile on the human's face. She could not stop remembering the way the stalker had fled in terror from a creature half its size, when the others had settled into an uneasy rest. Velara approached Cole, where he sat near the cave entrance. He was watching the jungle as he always did, and his eyes reflected the dim bioluminescence of the plants outside. She sat down beside him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Velara broke the silence. "I need you to explain," she said. "I need to understand what happened today." Cole did not look at her. "What specifically do you want to know, Your Highness?" "Everything," Velara said, and she heard the desperation in her own voice. "Your species has no natural weapons and no natural armor. You are not the strongest creatures on your world. And you are not the fastest by every measure my scientists use to classify species. You should be prey. But that stalker looked at you like you were the most dangerous thing it had ever seen." Cole was quiet for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft and distant. "Do you know what persistence hunting is, Your Highness?" Velara shook her head. Cole picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands as he spoke. "Before my species had tools, and before we had fire, we still needed to eat meat to survive. But we were exactly as you described us. We were slow and weak, and we had no claws or fangs. Every other predator on our world could outrun us in a sprint, and every large prey animal could escape us easily. So how did you hunt?" Velara asked. Cole looked at her then, and his eyes held that ancient light she had seen before. "We followed them I do not understand. We did not try to catch them in a sprint. Cole explained. Instead, we followed them at a steady pace when they ran away. From us, we kept walking. When they stopped to rest, we caught up to them. When they ran again, we kept walking. We would follow a single animal for hours, or even days, until it could not run anymore. How is that possible? Valara asked. Any animal can outlast a slow pursuit. Cole shook his head. Most animals cool their bodies by panting, and panting is not efficient when you are running. But humans cool our bodies by sweating, and sweating works even when we are moving. So while our prey was overheating and exhausted from repeated sprints, we stayed cool and steady. We carried water, so we did not need to stop at rivers. We could track across any terrain because we walked upright and could see above the grass, and we never stopped. Never. Vela felt something. Cole settled in her stomach. We would follow an antelope until its heart burst from exhaustion. Cole continued. We would track a deer until its legs gave out and it could not stand anymore. The animal would see us coming from a distance, and it would run, and it would think it had escaped, but then we would appear again on the horizon, still walking, still coming, and it would run again, and we would still be coming. He paused and looked back at the jungle. Every prey animal on Earth evolved the same fear response to us, Your Highness, not the fear of claws or teeth, the fear of something that would never stop, something that would follow you forever, something that would still be walking toward you long after your heart had given out from terror and exhaustion. Vela realized she was holding her breath. That stalker today did not see a weak primate. Cole said it looked into my eyes and saw millions of years of evolution. It saw the face of a creature that had hunted everything on its world to extinction or submission, not through strength or speed, but through patience and persistence and an absolute refusal to give up. Turned to face her fully, and his expression was serious. We are the monsters that other monsters have nightmares about, Your Highness. We did not conquer Earth because we were the most dangerous thing in a single moment. We conquered it because we were the most dangerous thing over time. We learned and we adapted, and we remembered, and we never stopped hunting. Valara thought about the great predators of the Corellan homeworld. They had been powerful and fast and deadly, but they had all been conquered by her ancestors using technology and weapons. The humans had apparently conquered their predators using nothing but their bodies and their minds. It seemed impossible, and yet she had seen the proof with her own eyes today. Creature evolved to kill had taken one look at a human and decided that running was the only option. Your species, she said slowly. You are all like this. Cole nodded. Every human carries this heritage in their bones, Your Highness. We do not think about it most of the time because we have not needed to hunt that way for thousands of years. But it is still there waiting. When I looked at that stalker, I did not see a monster. I saw prey, and some part of me that I cannot control and do not fully understand wanted to follow it. The fire crackled softly, and the sounds of the jungle filled the silence between them. Valara understood now why the Corellan Empire had been so quick to dismiss humanity. They had looked at the humans and seen no claws and no fangs and no obvious weapons. They had assumed that the humans were weak. They had been terribly wrong. The humans were not weak. They were simply dangerous in a way that no other species had ever been dangerous before. They were patient, and they never gave up. Valara looked at Cole with new eyes, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt respect, and underneath that respect she felt something else, something that might have been fear. The attack came without warning on the second day of their journey through the jungle. One moment, the group was moving through a clearing filled with strange purple flowers, and the next moment 2 of the Corellan warriors were dead. The creature that killed them was exactly as terrible as Valara had described it, was a Thesan stalker, and it stood 4 meters tall on 6 powerful legs. Its body was covered in black chitin that gleamed like polished metal, and its head was a nightmare of compound eyes and serrated mandibles. The two warriors never had a chance. The stalker dropped from the canopy above, and its front limbs punched through their armor like it was made of paper. They died before they could even scream the surviving Chirellon. Warriors opened fire immediately. Plasma bolts filled the air with heat and light, and the sound of the weapons was deafening in the enclosed space of the jungle. But the stalker did not fall. The plasma bolts filled the air with heat and light, and the sound of the weapons was deafening in the enclosed space of the jungle. But the stalker did not fire immediately. Closement this visbajon and it is tenant and close space of the jungle, but the spade did not fall. The plasma splashed against its armored hide and left scorch marks, but nothing more. This creature had evolved to survive in volcanic vents where temperatures reached thousands of degrees, and mere plasma weapons could not penetrate its natural defenses. The stalker turned toward the remaining warriors and let out a sound that was part scream and part grinding metal. It was a hunting call, and it meant that this creature had chosen its next victims. Commander Thexis shouted orders, and the warriors formed a defensive line in front of Princess Valarathi. Knew they were probably going to die, but they would die protecting their princess. That was what they had trained for their entire lives. But the stalker was not interested in the warriors. Its compound eyes scanned the group and locked onto Valara. Herself, somehow it knew that she was the most valuable target. Perhaps it could sense her pheromones, or perhaps it simply recognized the way the others protected her. Whatever the reason, the stalker began to move toward her with terrible purpose. Valara felt fear for the first time in centuries. She was going to die on this horrible world, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. And then Lieutenant Cole stepped forward. He moved past the defensive line of Chirellon warriors and walked directly toward the stalker. He did not run, and he did not shout, and he carried no weapon in his hands. He simply walked the stalker, paused. Its hunting call died in its throat, and its compound eyes focused entirely on this small, soft creature that was approaching it without fear. Cole stopped about 5 meters from the stalker and planted his feet firmly on the ground. He stood straight and squared his shoulders and looked directly into the creature's eyes. For a long moment nothing happened. The jungle was silent, and even the insects had stopped their endless buzzing. The stalker's mandibles clicked together. In what might have been confusion, it had never encountered prey that behaved this way. Everything on Thesa Prime ran from stalkers, and everything that did not run died. But this creature was not running. Cole did something then that made Valara's blood turn to ice in her veins. He smiled. It was not a friendly smile, and it was not a nervous smile. It was a slow, deliberate baring of teeth that held no warmth and no mercy. It was the smile of something that had killed before and would kill again. It was the smile of a predator. The stalker took a step backward. Cole took a step forward. The stalker made a sound that Valara had never heard before. It was a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from deep in its chest, and it sounded almost like fear. Cole took another step forward, and his smile widened. Stalker turned and fled. It moved so fast that it was nothing but a black blur, and it smashed through trees and vines in its desperation to escape. Within seconds it had vanished into the jungle, and the sound of its retreat faded into the distance. Clearing was silent. The Chirellon warriors stared at Cole with expressions of pure shock. Commander Thexis looked like he had just witnessed something impossible, and Princess Valara felt her entire understanding of the universe shift beneath her feet. "What did you do?" she whispered, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Cole turned to face her, and his smile faded back to that neutral expression he usually wore. "Apex predators are intelligent, Your Highness," he said, and his voice was calm and steady. "They survive by recognizing threats and avoiding fights. They cannot win." That creature just looked into my eyes and saw something it recognized, something it was afraid of. "But that is impossible," Valara said, and she hated how weak she sounded. are smaller than it and weaker than it, and you have no natural weapons. What could it possibly? Seeing you that would make it afraid. Cole was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softened. Saw what my ancestors saw when they looked into still water. Your Highness, it saw the face of an apex predator, a real one. Valara shook her head. You cannot be an apex predator. Humans have no claws and no fangs and no venom and no armor. You are soft and slow, and you should be prey for creatures like that stalker. Cole looked at her with those brown eyes, and for the first time, Valara saw something ancient in them, something old and patient and utterly without mercy. We are the apex predators of our world. Your Highness, he said, we hunted everything else to extinction or submission, not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we were something far more dangerous. What? Valara asked, and she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. We were persistent, Cole said, and we never ever gave up. The group continued their journey in silence after that. No one knew what to say, and no one could stop thinking about what they had just witnessed. The Kyrellan warriors looked at Cole differently now. They no longer saw a small, soft creature that needed protection. They saw something else entirely, and they were not sure they liked what they saw. The jungle of Thissa Prime swallowed them whole within minutes of leaving the shuttle. The canopy above was so thick that the sunlight became a dim green glow, and the air was so heavy with moisture that every breath felt like drinking water. Valara had experienced many hostile environments in her long life, but Thissa was different. This world felt alive in a way that made her skin crawl. The Kyrellan warriors took point and formed a protective circle around Princess Valara and the human delegation. Their armor hummed with energy shields, and their weapons were charged and ready. Every sensor they carried was active and scanning for threats. Ambassador Chun walked beside Valara and made polite conversation about trade agreements and diplomatic protocols. Seemed completely unconcerned about the danger they were in, and Valara found his calm attitude almost as irritating as his. Bodyguard Lieutenant Cole walked at the rear of the group, and he moved in a way that Valara had never seen before. He was not fast, and he was not particularly graceful, but there was something hypnotic about his movement. Every step he took was deliberate and careful, and he seemed to test the ground before putting his full weight on it. His eyes moved constantly from the trees to the undergrowth to the canopy above and back again. He never stopped watching. Your man walks like prey, Commander, Thexus whispered to Valara as they pushed through a particularly dense section of vegetation. He is always looking for danger and always ready to run. Valara nodded, but she was not so sure that the commander was right. She had studied apex predators across 100 worlds, and she had learned to recognize the difference between prey behavior and predator behavior. Prey animals watched for danger because they feared being eaten, but predators also watched constantly, and they watched because they were always hunting. The difference was subtle, but it was there if you knew how to look for it. As the hours passed, Valara found herself watching Cole more and more closely. He did things that made no sense to her at first. He would stop occasionally and examine the ground, or the bark of a tree, or the pattern of leaves on a plant. He would pick up soil and crush it between his fingers and smell-eyed, but watch the flight patterns of insects and listen to the calls of distant animals. Once he stopped the entire group because a certain type of bird had stopped singing somewhere ahead. The Kyrellan warriors were annoyed by the delay, but Cole simply waited until the birds started singing again before he allowed them to continue. What are you doing? Valara finally asked when she could not contain her curiosity any longer. Cole looked at her with those unsettling brown eyes, and his expression remained neutral. I am learning the terrain. Your Highness, that is impossible, Valara said, and she heard the frustration in her own voice. Our xenobiologists have studied Thissa for centuries, and they still do not fully understand this world. You cannot learn a death world in a few hours. Cole was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke in that same calm voice with Respect your highness, my species learned to read terrain for millions of years before we learned to read words. It is. In our bones, Valara did not know how to respond to that. She had never heard any species speak about instinct in that way, and it made her uncomfortable. The Corellans had evolved beyond instinct long ago, and they relied on technology and logic to survive. The idea that a species might still carry ancient survival knowledge in their very biology was strange and almost primitive, but she could not deny that Cole seemed to know things he should not know. He predicted a flash flood 10 minutes before it happened, and he led them to high ground without being asked. He identified 3 different poisonous plants just by looking at them, and he warned the group away from a water source that later turned out to be contaminated with parasites. When night began to fall, Cole found them a cave to shelter in, and the cave was exactly the right size and exactly the right shape to be defensible. There were no animals inside, and no signs the predators used it as a den. "How did you know this cave was safe?" Commander Thexus demanded, and his voice was suspicious. Cole shrugged. The vegetation around the entrance was undisturbed, and there were no tracks or droppings nearby. The airflow suggested the cave was shallow enough to have no hidden chambers, and the moss growth pattern indicated consistent temperature, which means no large warm-blooded animals have been using it. The commander stared at him. "You determined all of that by looking at plants and moss?" Cole nodded. Also, the insects were not avoiding the entrance, which they would do if predators had marked the territory. Recently, Valar felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm air. This human had gathered more useful intelligence in one day than her scanners had provided in a week, and he had done it using only his eyes and his nose and some ancient instinct that she did not understand. That night, as the group settled into the cave, Valara watched Cole prepare for sleep. He did not lie down in the center of the cave where it was warmest and safest. Instead, he positioned himself near the entrance with his back against the wall and his face toward the jungle. Even when his eyes closed, he did not seem to truly sleep. Every small sound made his breathing change, and every shift in the wind made his nostrils flare. He was resting, but he was also still watching, still hunting. Valara began to wonder if she had misjudged this human. She began to wonder if all the Corellans had misjudged humanity. The next morning would answer many of her questions, but the answers would not be the ones she expected, and they would change the way she saw the galaxy forever. Princess Valar of the Ascended Throne of Corel stood at the observation deck of her royal cruiser and watched the green world below with a mixture of fascination and disgust. Thessa Prime was beautiful in the way that deadly things often are. The entire planet was covered in jungle so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground, and the creatures that lived beneath that canopy had evolved into perfect killing machines over millions of years. The Kyrellan Empire had tried to colonize this world 3 times, and 3 times they had failed. Because of enemy fleets or rival empires, but because the wildlife simply refused to let them stay. Valara turned away from the viewport. When her aide announced the arrival of the human delegation, she had been dreading this moment for weeks. The humans were new to galactic politics, and they had only discovered faster than light travel 300 years ago, which made them practically infants compared to her people. The Corellans had ruled 1,000 star systems for 20,000 years, and they had seen countless young species rise and fall. Most of them never amounted to anything. Valara expected the humans to be no different. The door to the observation deck slid open, and 2 figures walked in. The first was Ambassador David Chun, who was a small man with graying hair and a calm smile that never seemed to leave his face. The second was a younger man in simple military clothing who carried no visible weapons and wore no armor of any kind. Valara felt her crystalline eyes narrow as she studied the second human. He was tall for his species, but still shorter than her warriors, and he had the kind of lean build that suggested endurance rather than strength. His hair was dark and cut short, and his eyes were a strange shade of brown that seemed to shift in the light. There was something unsettling about those eyes, but Velara could not identify what it was. Ambassador Chun bowed in the human fashion and introduced himself and his companion. The younger man was Lieutenant Marcus Cole, and he was apparently the only security officer the humans had sent to protect their ambassador. Vela almost laughed out loud. She gestured to her own guard, which consisted of 12 Chirellan warriors in full battle armor. Each one stood over 2 meters tall, and their bodies were enhanced with cybernetic implants that made them stronger and faster than any natural creature. They carried plasma rifles capable of burning through starship hulls, and each of them had killed at least 100 enemies in combat, and the humans had sent one ordinary man with no enhancements and no armor and no visible weapons. You bring a novice to guard you in the Emerald Hell? Velara asked, and she did not bother to hide the amusement in her voice. Ambassador Chun smiled that calm smile of his and nodded. Lieutenant Cole completed our survival training program, Your Highness, and he will be sufficient for our needs. Sufficient? Velara repeated, and she let the word hang in the air like an insult. She walked closer to the human soldier and studied him. The way she might study an insect, he did not flinch or look away, and his expression remained completely neutral. You know what? Lives on the surface of Thessa, Prime Lieutenant Cole. Velara asked. Cole nodded, but said nothing. She continued anyway, because she wanted him to understand exactly how foolish his presence here was. The dominant predators on Thessa are called stalkers, and they are 4 meters tall with armored bodies and limbs designed for killing. They hunt in packs, and they have been responsible for the deaths of 3 ascended hunting parties this cycle alone. My warriors, she gestured to the armored giants. Behind her are the finest soldiers in the Chirellan Empire, and even they treat Thessa with respect. Cole still said nothing. His silence was starting to irritate her. We will be traveling 12 kilometers through primary jungle to reach the summit facility, Velara said, and this is a test that my people have required of all diplomatic partners. It separates the strong from the weak, and it shows us who is worthy of alliance with the ascended throne. She leaned closer to the human and lowered her voice. Many delegations have failed this test, Lieutenant, and failure on Thessa Prime means death. Do you understand what I am telling you? Cole met her eyes, and for a moment Velara felt something strange. It was not fear exactly, but it was close to it. There was something in this human that she could not read, and something that did not match his unremarkable appearance. I understand, Your Highness, Cole said, and his voice was calm and quiet. Velara stepped back and turned to Ambassador Chun. Your government insults us by sending such inadequate protection, she said, and if your man dies in the jungle, it will reflect poorly on humanity as a whole. Chun kept smiling that infuriating smile. I appreciate your concern, Your Highness, but I have complete confidence in Lieutenant Cole. He may not look like much, but he comes from a long line of survivors. Velara did not know what that meant, and she did not care. She dismissed the humans to their quarters and turned back to the viewport. The jungle of Thessa Prime stretched out below her like a green ocean, and somewhere in that ocean were creatures that had killed the best warriors her empire had ever produced. Tomorrow she would watch the human novice learn exactly how small and weak his species really was, and perhaps when he was dead, she would have the satisfaction of knowing that she had been right about humanity all along. But as she stared at the jungle, Velara could not shake the memory of those brown eyes. There had been something in them that she recognized but could not name. It was the same look she had seen in the eyes of predators just before they struck. That was impossible. Humans were not predators. They were soft and slow, and they came from a world that her scientists had classified as unremarkable. There was nothing special about them at all. Velara told herself this over and over as the hours passed and the time for landing grew closer. But somewhere deep in her mind, a voice whispered that she was wrong. That voice would grow much louder in the days to come. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Thessa Prime, The next morning, and Velara watched the human delegation prepare for the journey. Ahead, Ambassador Cheng wore lightweight clothing designed for jungle travel, and he carried a small pack of supplies. Lieutenant Cole wore almost the same thing, but there was something different about the way he moved. Checked his equipment with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long practice, and his eyes never stopped scanning the shuttle interior. When the shuttle doors opened and the thick, humid air of Thesa rushed in, Velara saw Cole take a deep breath. He closed his eyes for just a moment, and when he opened them again, that strange light was back. He looked at the jungle the way a man might look at an old friend or an old enemy. Velara decided then that she would keep a close watch on this human novice. Something told her that the journey ahead would be more interesting than she had expected.